Welcome to Seniority Authority, the podcast where I track down experts to answer your questions on aging. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. Let's get smarter about growing older. Raise your hand if you think you're smart. Oh, wait. You're not a sucker, right? You wouldn't fall for one of those 3-card Monty scams on the street, of course. You save your money, examine your risks. You don't want to lose what you've worked so hard for. Well, I have some bad news for you. The scamming business is alive and well and flourishing in this new connected world. Fraud is a big business, and it's targeting older adults. No longer a simple street games. Now it's phone and mail fraud perpetrated by sophisticated international crime syndicates. Sound too John Grisham for you? Well, stay tuned for my guest, Kathy Stokes, who is Director of Fraud Prevention Programs at AARP and has some facts that will curl your hair. Kathy is a nationally recognized leader in the consumer fraud arena and has run the AARP Fraud Watch Network since 2019. She's led a national effort to transform how our country addresses consumer fraud and has created new victim support programs as well as a multi-year campaign to end the use of gift cards in fraud. She currently serves on an advisory council to the board of the International Association of Financial Crimes Investigations and is a member of the Consumer Education Committee of the Scams Against Older Adults Advisory Group, which is convened by the Federal Trade Commission. She received her master's from Johns Hopkins University and undergrad from University of Pittsburgh. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kathy.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too, because fraud is a big discussion point, especially with older adults. But I want to start with you. How did you get interested in fraud and international crime fighting? Did you want to grow up to be a crime fighter when you were younger?
Actually, now that you mention it, I do remember that when I was a kid, I wanted to be a cop. And then a little
Oh,
later, I wanted to be a police psychologist because I wanted to figure out what made them tick. But I ended
interesting.
up going into rhetoric and communication instead. But the first part of my career, I've done a range of things from public policy to financial literacy and education, retirement planning education. And so the first good chunk of my career was really about financial literacy, helping people understand retirement planning, 401ks, things like that. And I did a lot of work for close to a decade with Ernst & Young, where we would go out to big corporate clients and we would do education programming for their employees to better understand their defined benefit pension plan, the 401k, those kind of retirement savings things. Went on my own for about a decade, did communication consulting largely around financial education. Ended up coming to work for one of my clients, AARP. And within maybe 18 months, I had gone from working again in retirement education to being the interim lead of this sort of new fraud prevention work that AARP was doing. It had been around for a while, but it was sort of being reconfigured, rethought. And now, instead of talking to young people about preparing for financial needs later in life, I'm talking about older people and to older people about how to protect your assets that you have saved because fraud is at an epidemic level in this country.
Wow. Wow. Well, I'm also thrilled to hear a fellow communications English major doing good in the world. So there's a lot to learn about the state of fraud these days, as I found out when my conversation with you. Part of your work is to educate people as to what to be aware of. You just mentioned that fraud is at an epidemic level. Can you share some statistics that clarify that for our audience?
I can, and they're directional. We don't have a good handle on just how much fraud is out there because Well, for a number of reasons, primarily because people don't report it when they experience it. And we'll talk about that later. A lot of that has to do with feeling humiliated, embarrassed, not wanting to let, if you're an older adult, not wanting your kids to think that there's something wrong and they would take away your independence, right? So all of that's sort of in the mix. We did look at reported data. The Federal Trade Commission is a federal agency that, among many other things, collects this information annually. And when we look prior to the pandemic, looking at 2019, the reports of losses were, I think, somewhere around 2.9 billion. Fast forward to 2022, 8.8 billion. Just think about that.
Wow.
So it tells us a couple of things.
2.2 billion to 8 billion
8
in
bill, 8 point,
in
yep,
how many years? Like,
from 2019 to 2022. And
jeez.
that's the period of time when so many of us jumped online, right? We
Yeah.
were in the pandemic. If we were working from home online. If we're retired or not in the workforce, we're going online for socializing, for purchasing, getting groceries, buying Lysol, all the stuff we were trying to do. And,
Connect with friends.
yeah, exactly. And the scammers followed us. They just had this whole new opportunity for so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of new people online to use, a lot of the old scam scams that they had out there, but also to take advantage of the headlines that we were seeing. And if you say 8.8 billion is from the Federal Trade Commission, I just saw something the other day that just in a particular type of payment, and that's gift cards, it could be more than $50 billion.
Oh my gosh, $50
Yeah,
billion dollars?
yeah.
Wow.
So
Because as you said,
there's
a lot of this is not reported because of shame and embarrassment and fear that it reflects badly on you, which
a lot
we're
of
gonna
it.
talk about.
Yeah, and it's also not knowing what to do.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe a long time ago, when someone would lose money to a scam, they would call the police and file a report. But for so many years, we look at fraud as somehow being the victim's fault, that even the police sometimes don't know that it's a crime and they look at it as a civil matter. And so you might call the local police and say, somebody made me believe that my grandson was in trouble. I sent $10,000 to get him out of jail and it was a scam. The police may say, well, you're going to have to take that up with a lawyer, or it's a civil matter, or send it to the FBI, or, well, you gave them your money, didn't you? So there's
Oh,
really no time here. And I say that, but it's not a broad brush. It's kind of a broad brush, but there are many, many people in our criminal justice system that get this, that understand it. But over so many years of deprioritizing fraud simply by making it look like it can only happen to somebody else, typically older people, and it will never happen to us. And we just lost the thread that it's a crime. So your immediate reaction isn't to report it anyway. And then if you do think, well, how should I report it? You go online and it's like, well, report it to the FTC. No, report it to the FBI. No, report it to the Department of Justice. No, report it here. And so it's like, what do you do? There are too many places to report, so you don't report it at all.
wow. And like we said at the top of the show, everyone feels like, well, I'm smart enough. I'm gonna recognize that. And we're gonna get into what to look for. But just while we're on this topic, so if you do experience fraud, what's your recommendation? Where should people go to report it?
I think it's critical to file a police report. I think
Yeah.
that this has become such a humongous problem in this country that I'm seeing some changes that make me believe that we are at an inflection point where maybe some way down the road, and maybe not too far in the future, either at the state level or the federal level, we're going to have a way to find some means of restitution for victims because the losses are so profound and impactful at the individual, the family level, but also at the state and federal level because of government benefits that now
Yeah.
have to support people who've lost everything, right? So you want to have that police report in case 3 or 5 or 7 years down the road, there is a means of restitution.
Okay.
You can't, I guess you could say I reported it to the Federal Trade Commission too, but that police report is, that verifiable moment where they took the report. Are they going to investigate it? Maybe not, but maybe down the road they will. So police report first and foremost and insist that they take it.
Good. Okay, so that's step 1, just to have
Yeah.
it. We're talking about older adults, and you shared with me that the myth that this happens more to older adults, this online fraud happens more with older adults than younger, but you said it is a myth, that the younger generation experiences actually more of it than older adults, but older adults have more to lose. Can you explain that to the listeners?
Yeah. And again, this is directional. We're looking at what's reported. But according to the Federal Trade Commission data, younger adults experience fraud and fraud losses far more, at least they report it far more than older adults. But when you look at the median loss, it's maybe a couple of $100 for the younger person, and that's terrible, and that shouldn't have happened to them. It's not to diminish that at all. But the older adults who have life savings, housing wealth, pension, life insurance, if they're widowed, and on and on. There's so much more for the criminals to go after, and they lose a lot more. That's why AARP is so concerned about it.
Because a loss at this time is crippling
You know,
because
when
it
you're
can wipe
yeah,
out your savings.
when you're 26 and you lose $300 to a pop-up on your computer that said there was a problem and you had to call Microsoft and it wasn't Microsoft and you lost that $300, that's terrible. But you're in the workforce. You have time to make up the $300. If you're 87 years old and you've just lost $500,000 and possibly even your home,
Mm,
you don't recover from that.
wow. And that's happening.
That's happening.
How do you track statistics about fraud? How do you know who's perpetuating the fraud? So we're getting, and this topic is rife with lack of knowledge because people aren't reporting it. But of the people that you are tracking, how do you know that the fraud is growing and who is doing it? Do you have statistics to share about that?
Yeah, well, we look at the directional data that are out there from the Federal Trade Commission, from IC3, which is the FBI, from some other organizations. There's a company, Javelin, that has been doing identity fraud studies for 20 years. About 3 or 4 years ago, we got involved and had them start to include identity fraud through scams, and it revealed so much more in losses to scams and identity fraud than identity fraud through data breaches and losing your wallet and things like that. So we look at that. We also have a Fraud Watch Network helpline, and we kind of see it as a canary in a coal mine,
Mhm.
because if you even just get a handful of calls in a day on a specific scam, they're probably from a handful of different states, and they have the same MO, and that's our indicator that something is coming down the line, and to be aware of it. And I think that on the criminal enterprise front, there's plenty of data to support that this is organized crime now. The Department of Justice sees it, FBI sees it. Experts who may be working in industry and protecting business enterprises and government, they're seeing the same thing. So all of the criminal enterprises are essentially the same, whether they're trying to hack in to a government database or they're trying to socially engineer a person who's trying to buy something online.
Wow. Wow. I want to dig into this because I think this is fascinating. But my impetus is always okay, how can we get smarter about this? How can we recognize this? And what are the major categories of fraud that we should put our antenna up and be aware of?
I think the first big category, and kind of accounts for all scams, but just depends on how you look at it, is those people who are impersonating somebody. Imposter scams is what we refer to them as. That could be somebody who's pretending to be from a federal agency, contacting you by, email or text or letter or robocall saying there's a serious problem with back taxes owed or your social security number being suspended or it could be positive. It's the Federal Trade Commission and we have a grant program and you're eligible for $43,000. Call us back. It's these kind of things that, get us into an excited state, whether it's really scared or really excited because there's a financial gain. And there it begins. So you've got the government imposter, you've got business imposters, you've got scammers pretending to be the local utility and contacting you and saying, you haven't paid your bill for the last 4 months. We've sent you letters. We've heard nothing back from you, and we're cutting you off today. And they'll do it in the middle of a snowstorm or
Oh,
when it's 97 degrees outside. And, you're convinced, but wait, I know I paid those bills. It's like, well, you haven't, according to our records, and but we can help you with that. So what we need you to do is pay what you owe by running down to the CVS, picking up 3 Google Play cards that are on that big wrap when you walk in.
mm-hmm.
Put $1,000 or put $900 on each of those. And then read us the numbers off the back. That's the quickest way to get payment, and you're not going to be shut off. And
Oh
that's
my
just the
gosh.
utility scam. There are so many businesses being impersonated. The biggest one right now, I don't think that they would mind me saying because they're very aware, it's Amazon. People are
Wow.
calling, pretending to be Amazon, saying, hey, we just noticed that there was a purchase of, 4 iPads for, $800 on your account. If that was you, fine. But if it wasn't you, call us back at this number. Or it's an email that says the same thing, but click on this link. And it's
Okay.
all, and of course, probably more than 90% of consumers have an Amazon account. And
Yeah.
they're betting that when they target you, that you're going to have that account and you're going to click on the link or you're going to call the number back instead of taking that step back and going, wait a minute, I have an Amazon account and I have a login on the email, or I mean on the website, or I have a login on the app. I'm going to check it out myself.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that because we're in this state of heightened emotion. And when we're there, it's so hard physiologically because of our brains to access logical thinking. And the criminals know that. And that's a playbook that has been used since the dawn of time, but now it's being used at scale from these organized crime rings that have a ton of money. They hire employees, they have scripts, they have openers, they have closers, and they have that playbook, and they have lead lists.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's just incredible. And it's true. We have that fight or flight syndrome. Our amygdala takes over our brain and it's just react, react, react. And they're playing on that. And it's very sophisticated. I had a new employee here. We're a very small nonprofit that is not a Riverwoods. If you don't live in New Hampshire, you don't know us. And someone got into our email and created an alias for our CEO and reached out to a new marketing employee and said, hey, I need a favor. Will you go down to CVS and get me 10 gift cards? And this employee did just that. Here's the CEO asking me to do a favor. Of course I'm going to do that. So it gets very personal,
It does.
right?
It's not just in businesses. It's known as a business email compromise, but for us, we call it the "Can you do me a favor" scam because it also happens out in the private world outside of business or nonprofits. You get a quick text from a faith leader. Now, let's say you work with a church as a volunteer, and the faith leader says, "Hey, I'm running out of town, but this new family needs our help right away. Can you go ahead and get $250 on a Target card and just read the numbers off the back, or just take a picture and send it to me. And when I'm back in town, I can repay you from the fund that we have. Thanks very much." Oh, of course I'm going to help somebody, and then the money's gone.
So basically, don't ever buy a gift card for anyone for any reason unless you personally know them.
Gift cards cannot be used as a form of payment. So if somebody's trying to make you believe that you can solve something quickly by purchasing a gift card and sharing the numbers off the back, that is in 100% of the cases fraud. If somebody at work or in your home community reaches out and asks you for a quick favor to buy some gift cards for something, reach back out to that person through an email or a phone number that you know is theirs and verify it before you go out. But then again, maybe understand that that first shock, that first heightened emotion is really is the red flag, is the trigger. And if we can understand that, then we don't engage to begin with. But how do you do that? If your brain is set to go sky high in emotion when something like this approaches you, do we have the capability to step back from that? I think we do
Mm.
if we know what the scams are. And data show that if you know about the scam, you're far less likely to engage with it. But for the scams that you don't know about, or in that moment, it's not a scam, it's your grandson or it's your CEO.
If you're getting smarter, let us know. Leave us a review, a rating, wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell your friends and follow us on social. We're at Seniority Authority on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And don't forget, if you're listening to YouTube, hit the notification bell so you can subscribe. Or subscribe to our newsletter at seniorityauthority.org so you don't miss a thing. I want to touch on something really frightening that you were telling me about as it relates to, I mean, that we've all had the, hi, I'm a prince from XYZ and I need thousands of dollars. And that's kind of easy to recognize, but we've all grown more sophisticated. So have the criminal enterprises. Can you talk a little bit about AI and how that enhances the scam? Because I found this to be totally frightening.
Well, all kinds of technology have helped us as a society do so much, has helped us as individuals and families do so much more, be more productive, be more connected. But all technology is has the risk that a bad actor is going to use it to advantage, right? AI is the same way. Artificial intelligence is remarkable in what it can allow, people with good intent to use. People with bad intent, though, can use it for their own nefarious purposes. And I had heard this before, and I saw a newscast on it just yesterday. A woman had a call from her daughter, 15-year-old daughter, absolutely convinced it was her, saying, I am being kidnapped. They need $10,000 or whatever it was. And there was absolutely no doubt in this woman's mind that she was talking to her daughter, and it was completely faked. They took 3 seconds of her voice that they were able to find on social media, maybe TikTok or Facebook or something. All they needed was 3 seconds of her voice to create an entire dialogue.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
So when we say that people are inept or dumb or stupid or they got duped, that's not the case. Scams these days are virtually, many of them anyway, unrecognizable as scams.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes back to kind of the topic of victim blaming, and especially with older adults, that as we talked about earlier, older adults are a little embarrassed to I'm this smart person, I'm a PhD, I ran my own business, I raised 5 kids. They're smart, competent adults, and it's hard for them to say, I was duped. And as you said in the beginning of kind of the history of tracking fraud, there's this focus on blaming the victim. How does that impact older adults? And what do we do instead? How can we react appropriately? What would your recommendation be? How do we fix that?
I'm so glad you asked that. It's something that myself and my team are very passionate about. About 3 years ago, the team was pretty new, 2019, I think it was actually, and we have a team that does the fraud prevention work. We have a team that does victim support work, and we were like, what big bold things should we really try to do? We came up with three, and one of them came out of the victim support work that we do. They were saying, like, look, they've been doing this for 20 years. This
Wow.
fraud helpline, it was in different iterations. It was part of our foundation, but they've been doing something like this for 20 years, talking directly to victims and their families. I'm like, to A1, victims will call and say, I can't believe I fell for it. I can't
Mm,
believe I got duped. The family will call, something's wrong with my mom. She won't believe that this is a scam. What is wrong with her? Can't believe she's, giving all of our money away. And they're like, what? And we're doing that. Why do we do that? And can we prove that we do that? And if we do that, can we change it? Because we're going to have to change it if we want our society to take it seriously.
sure. And if we
So,
want the facts to be reported.
yeah. So, we got some funding to do a project, and it produced a paper called Blame and Shame in the Context of Financial Fraud. Trust me, it's a very dense paper, but there's a really good article about it on AARP.org, and we have a press release, and we've used it to refine our messaging, which basically says, yeah, we blame people all the time. We see it in our news headlines. Woman scammed $30,000, or but if it's a crime of violence or property, they're not talking about the guy being duped into getting shot. So
Right.
it's a very different
Yeah.
focus, right?
Yeah.
And it's a crime, and we realize that a lot of people don't even understand that it's a crime, that our knee-jerk reaction is what we've been saying for years. But guess what? We also found out we don't mean any harm by that. It's just the language we've been using. And
Mhm.
once we're aware of it, we can shift it, and we align it to, what was it, 40 years ago, when, the common response to somebody being a rape victim was like, well, what was she wearing? Or why was
Yes.
she alone at night? And our society has largely moved away from that. There's still some people that believe that, sadly, but we've changed how we think about it. We change how we react to it. Same thing with death by suicide. It wasn't until it was maybe 30 years ago or so that, when suicide was taking so many lives, and so much of what the societal narrative was, well, that was selfish, or like, there was something wrong with them or whatever. And
Yeah.
survivors, family members, survivors, they banded together and they said, we've just stopped this. And suicide is entirely preventable.
Mhm.
Just have to think about it and look at it differently to provide the right resources. And now you have suicide prevention at every level in our society. So we believe that, especially because we don't really mean anything by it, that we can
Yeah.
change this narrative of blaming victims. And instead of having that headline saying woman scammed of $30,000, what if it's criminal steals woman's life savings? I think people would
Exactly.
still want to read that article. They don't need the article, or the headline doesn't need to be, the clickbait in that way. I still think that people will want to read that article. When we experience fraud ourselves, let's go light on ourselves. Remember, this is largely unrecognizable
L
these days.
Largely
And
unrecognizable and perpetuated by international criminal syndicates. So it's
yes,
it's it's like smart people that are focused 100% on doing this.
it's 100% their livelihood. And yes, there's the lone grifter out there, to be sure. But the other thing to know about these transnational criminal enterprises is, you'll hear often from local law enforcement, well, we can't do anything about it. They're overseas. That's wrong. Um, yes, it may begin overseas, but they have a lot of people in the US doing their bidding to make it happen. We have money mules, we have money launderers, we have people that are making the calls in the United States.
Yeah.
Most of that is coming out from outside, but A lot of it's happening inside. And if we could spend some time and effort disrupting what is happening on the ground in the United States, those guys overseas are going to come up with something else to do, something that's not so difficult or
Well,
disrupted.
yeah,
Go
let's
after
make
the bad guys, arrest them here in the United States. Make the crime, make the punishment fit the crime. You know, so many of these like smaller players, they'll get a slap on the wrist and they're back out the next day. Put them in jail.
Yeah, I agree. Make it hard for them. If we're not fighting against them, then they're just going to expand and grow like a virus.
And
And
I submit that's why it's grown. Okay,
mm,
opportunity, absolutely, because we're online, but because we do not have a fit response from a law enforcement, criminal justice perspective, we can never combat this.
do you see us ever having a fraud czar or a unified government response and escalated policy against fraud, understanding that it is, you know, large transnational criminal organizations? Why are we not more coordinated? And I'm not your ARP, you're not the government, but what's the hesitation about coordinating a response at the governmental level?
I don't think it's necessarily a hesitation. I think it's a lack of understanding from basically every level in society about how problematic this is. And until we can shine the bright light on this fraud that is happening, on how many millions of people are losing how many billions of dollars, how people are dying by suicide because not only in many of these cases have they been wiped out financially, but in a lot of them, the victim thought that they were deeply in love with the person they were going to spend the rest of their life with. So there's the emotional impact. There's the impact of the family not understanding that this was sophisticated and that mom isn't cognitively declined. She's
Yeah.
not she's not losing it financially. You know, she was a victim of a crime and families are being torn apart. Generational wealth is being lost. And until we can look at that way in this society, and that's what this narrative change is going forward, we're not going to do enough. Do I think that we can do enough? Absolutely. I believe we can, but it's going to take commitment from the federal government. It's going to take commitment from state and local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, nonprofits, for-profit companies whose names are being used in these crimes, banks, financial institutions. We got to come together and solve for this. We do a really good job of cyber protection for infrastructure, for businesses. Currently, we do almost nothing to protect at the individual level except say, you should have known better.
Oh my gosh. That's so pathetic that that is our response. You touch,
And education is critical.
yeah,
Education is absolutely critical. We will never stop educating, right?
yeah.
Can't educate to to be aware of something that it's not recognizable as a scam.
And that's the whole purpose of this podcast. And by the way, we are going to put the ARP article that you mentioned on our show in our show notes. But I would just want to touch on something you referenced that I think many people also aren't aware of, which is the romance scam, which is alive and well. And can we talk about that?
Yeah, this is uh, such a horrible, horrible crime because it's not just financial; it's emotional. And you know, a lot of people would assume that romance scams, you know, mostly happen to young people who are online dating and you know, just not being cautious enough or whatever. And it can be further from the truth. So many people these days meet others online, whether on dating apps or dating websites. You know, people get married and live happily ever after, and that's awesome. But these what I'll call more like relationship scams are happening. They're happening in these areas of where people are trying to find love, but also in places where you would never expect it. You know, you're looking through your social media feed and somebody reaches out and says, "Oh, hey, you're a gardener. I'm a gardener too." And it can begin that way.
Mm,
It can begin when you're online playing Words with Friends, or you're online with your, your community club, or wherever they're looking for people, and they're able to gather information about us because of social media, because of our profiles that are out there. We may not understand that we haven't really locked them down, and they're able to access our information and use it in their scheme. One of the biggest changes that has happened is relationship scams that begin with what looks like a text sent in error. I got one just the other day.
oh,
And it said
really?
something like, "Hello, my name is Selena Lee, and I wonder when my wine shipment is going to be sent." I'm like, hmm.
Oh,
And what she would expect, or this person would expect, is I would respond saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, you have the wrong number." So I did. "I'm sorry, you have the wrong number." And the response is, "Oh, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't disturb you." And that just begins the conversation. And a lot of these conversations are, they're these threat actors. You're not talking to one person. There's probably 30 people on your case taking turns having the conversation. And there are really sad tales to tell about it. The relationship turns into a friendship, trusted friendship, or a trusted romantic relationship, but you've never met the person. But it doesn't matter because you think you have.
right.
You're in this relationship, right? And it turns into now, hey, look what I just bought yesterday. I got this Maserati, and I've got this great house. I was just in, I was in France, and I'm able to do all of this because I'm really good at investing in cryptocurrency. Can I show you how?
Wow.
And there it begins. And they'll put you on a legitimate crypto exchange, and eventually we'll move you on to a different exchange, and it seems entirely legitimate from this trusted person. And you're seeing all these great returns, and they'll let you cash out a little bit, so you're feeling it, uh, but then sometime later, and you've got all these gains, so you think, and you've put hundreds of $1,000s into this investment. We go back and say, okay, I'm cashing out. And you'll get a response that says, well, sorry, you weren't aware, but you have to pay taxes on this amount of money before you can retrieve it. You're talking 30, 40, $50,000. And so they're like, well, I'll have that kind of money. And then they begin to understand none of this was real. And, and the person disappears, and the money's long gone.
Oh,
And it's
that
not just
is,
happening to older people, it's happening to everybody at every age. They know no demographic bounds. But again, if you're an older person, you have more assets ostensibly. So
so,
there are more to invest.
and they're a more desirable target market for the criminals because older people have more resources. So you're going to get more for your individual scam.
I'm sure you have talked with your audience about retirement saving, and how many of us at this age are really sort of behind the eight ball. We haven't saved
Yeah.
enough. Think about somebody who you've learned to love or trust, or both, showing you a way to make up for what you haven't been able to do yet, and how you can you can prepare for yourself so that you're not a burden to future generations of your family. You have the intent, the right intent, but then you lose all your money, and we go, well, what were you thinking?
Yeah. And these are smart people. I have a friend who, has been widowed for a long time, met somebody online. He was on an offshore rig. They talked every day. They talked, not just emailed. And he doesn't exist. The person that she's thinking. So it's they go for the weak points of what we are yearning for, connection. Uh, uh, we want connection. We want to have financial stability. So they're preying on those kinds of impulses, natural impulses of ours.
That's absolutely the case. And You talked about your friend who is a widow. We work with a victim who's now, we call her a warrior. She's a victim turned survivor and turned warrior who, in her 60s, she had taken care of her husband for 12 years before he passed away. And she was not looking for a relationship, but she got connected with somebody who was on Facebook. She just met him on her as she's perusing posts, and she's getting this all the time. She never responds, right? But for
Mhm.
some reason, this time she responds, and the guy's name's Tony. And Tony's telling her all about how much he loves gardening and he sees that she does. And oh my goodness, and I see you're taking care of dogs at the end of their lives, respite dogs. I do that too. That's so great. And begins the conversation. Takes her off of that platform onto Google Hangouts at the time. And he starts impressing her with like how much he cares about her, how he's these young kids who he's widowed too. And, the story gets really deep and she ends up really kind of falling in love with this guy. His kids call her mom. And then it begins.
Oh,
The daughter reaches out there in a private boarding school in London while dad is off on a UN assignment, sort of a Doctors Without Borders kind of thing, right?
yeah.
Tony is. Daughter reaches out, hey, mom, there's some things I need. I don't have the money. Could you send me a gift card or could you buy a gift card and read me the numbers off the back? And this woman, her name's Kate. She's like, well, how does that work? And the girl was like, well, it just does, just if you give me the numbers, I can then use that gift card online or, whatever. And that's where it started. And then it was something for the son. And then it was all the while saying, I cannot wait to meet you in person. Go start looking at homes.
Oh
I'm
my
I'm I'm
gosh.
gonna get out of this project. And when I do, I'm grabbing my kids and we're coming to the United States and we're a family.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then the big asks start. And one of them involved like, okay, I'm coming to see you, and video and pictures, and here I am at the airport. Can't wait to see you, babe. I love you. She stays up all night because he's going to be flying in and she's going to meet him, and he never shows up. And then the next call is from his lawyer. He was arrested. Somebody put drugs in his bags, and he needs $20,000 to get bailed out. Well, eventually, she understands what this all is, and she's completely devastated, completely embarrassed, won't tell anybody. She's lost everything.
Oh,
She ends up finally telling her sisters, and they're really supportive. One of them says, hey, call the Fraud Watch Network helpline at AARP, see how they can help you. And that's how we ended up getting connected. She's telling her story all over the country. And she has the courage to do that because she understands that her story is going to help somebody else not fall victim. Fast forward to this past summer, I think it was this past summer, she didn't have enough money to fix her air conditioning because this guy stole all her money. And so she had one of those portable units. It caught on fire, burned her house down,
oh my
and
gosh.
took with the fire her 6 respite dogs.
Oh my God.
All of this to say, the impact doesn't end with that last gift card.
Yeah.
She's an incredibly resilient human being. She's moving into a new house tomorrow. But she continues to get out there and tell her story, for
How
the very reason that,
amazing.
yeah,
How
she's
amazing that you have this victim support network and that you're able to help her and that she's strong enough to tell other people because that's that's how this is going to change.
yeah,
Is people speaking up.
telling their story.
Yeah. That's the only way it's going to change. Do you have any practical do's and don'ts that you would recommend that my listeners would watch for? What should they stay on top of? What should they be aware of so this doesn't happen to them?
Sure. I mean, it all sounds so terrifying, and it's like, I'm going to throw up my hands because I can't do anything. We can do things while we are agitating for change, while we are saying, Policymakers, you got to do something. Law enforcement, you got to do something. While we're doing that, we can do some things to protect ourselves. We all have something that gets us online, right? We have the computer, laptop, or the tablet, or the smartphone. Make sure that those are password protected,
Okay.
the hardware themselves, so that if someone grabs it up, they don't have easy access to, any of your banking information or anything like that. And if you can do it with a biometric, like a thumb or a face, that's so much the better. Any operating system on any of those devices needs to be set to automatically update. So if you're an iPhone user and you get that 4.33 update ready to download, and you're like, oh, that's going to take a half an hour, do it. Because
Okay.
quite often, those updates are to patch a vulnerability that they've just figured out. And it's the same with antivirus software. You have the firewall, antivirus, malware. Make sure you're using what you have if it's resident on your system. If you need to purchase it, and it'll run in the background looking for problems, any viruses that you may have picked up by going to a website that ended up not being the website you thought it was. But those also receive updates. Set your protective software to automatically update as well for the same reason. Known vulnerabilities are found and they are patched.
Great.
Telephone. It's so hard, especially if someone's feeling like not connected. And this happened a lot during the pandemic with social isolation. You get a phone call, you're not sure who it is, but you pick up. I just have to tell you, don't trust your phone anymore until we've solved the robocall problem, the illegal robocall problem. Don't answer your phone unless you know who's calling. You have your names in your list, especially with your smartphone. It's going to be my daughter or my son or a friend. But if it's a number I don't know, I am not answering it. Let it go to voicemail. 9 out of 10 times it's not going to voicemail. But if it is, you can listen with intent. And you can
Hmm.
say, does it seem right that the Social Security Administration would call me out of the blue? Doesn't sound right. Or that Amazon would call me. Well, I have this app. Let me check and see if they're trying to reach me. It's so hard because of spoofing. The number can look like it's coming from your bank.
It
Um,
it
uh,
can. It
yeah.
can look like it's coming from your town and it's not coming from your town. I think that's very wise. Just don't answer the phone if you don't
And
recognize it.
yeah, and even if your bank is calling, don't pick it up. Call your bank back on the number from the card, the back of your debit card or the credit card or your bank statement. It's just so easy for them to make us believe that they're somebody that they're not. We just can't trust incoming messaging. We also can't trust emails and texts that have links in them. Same reason. Click on that link because, oh my God, it's my bank, or oh my God, it's Amazon and there's a problem. And they're going to send you to a fake website where they're going to try to get financial information, or they're automatically downloading a piece of malicious software that's going to try to steal all of your credentials for your financial accounts and other accounts. It's all this stuff that we used to be able to trust, that until the business world, until our law enforcement figure out how to protect us better, we have to protect ourselves.
Those are great suggestions. And another great recommendation that I have is for all of our listeners to sign up for your email fraud watch newsletter. Can you share that address with us?
Yeah, and just go out to aarp.org/Fraud Watch Network. I want you to go out there because there's a ton of really great information. We have a dedicated investigative reporter who's writing on fraud all the time. We have what we call a fraud resource center with probably 80 easy, easily digestible tip sheets on the romance scam or cryptocurrency scams, those kind of things. But there's also the opportunity to sign up, like you said, either by email or by text for our biweekly watchdog alerts. They appear in your inbox or they appear on your phone, and just a quick read. This is what we're hearing about today. This is how it works. This is what to look for. And even if it's something you know about, it's reminding you by receiving it that this stuff is happening, and keeping you aware. And you may know about it, but maybe your mom and dad don't know about it, or your sister doesn't know about it. We have to talk more about the fraud before the fraud happens.
Absolutely. We have to inoculate ourselves by hearing about it and understanding it's out there. And I think that is terrific. And you've done such a great job today. Just, the tip of the iceberg of all of your work. And I feel like we are all going to be smarter because of this. Before we let you go, I want to ask you some personal questions. We know you're good at spotting fraud, but getting to know you better, tell us what your favorite guilty pleasure is.
Oh my, I have to admit it, it's Twizzlers.
Okay. Okay.
The
Red?
red licorice.
The red. Okay. All right. Good to know. Of all the good things that you do, what's your favorite healthy practice?
I think I just developed a new one that I'm going to stick with. I took a vacation out of the country for the first time since COVID last week, not this past week, the week before. I never checked an email. I never checked my phone messages, and I had a delightful and restful week. And I'm going to do that even if I'm not going away. It's really what you need to just, pull yourself out of the day-to-day stress of frustration and commitment to the work that you're doing, and just take that break. You really need to take that break. So I'm going to be doing that from now on.
I wholeheartedly agree. It changes your mindset completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's guaranteed to make you laugh?
Well, I'm a big animal lover, love dogs, love cats. For some reason, I have a bunny rabbit
Oh.
as a pet. It's a long story, but her name is Fig, and
Oh.
Fig has quite the attitude. She's this little 3-pound thing, but if she's angry, she's going to tell you, and it makes me laugh with delight every time. It can be something as simple as I cough and it bothered her, so she does stomping. She'll take one of her back paws and thump really, really loud on the floor, and it just breaks me up.
Oh my
Every time.
gosh. A 3-pound rabbit is basically giving you attitude.
Yes, and it's heard all around the house. I have a small house, but oh yeah, it's like, oh, Fig's mad again.
I'd like to meet Fig.
You can meet Fig next time.
Yes. Last book you loved.
Well, I do read a lot. I haven't read stuff that I, have fallen in love with lately. I also do a lot of books online or Audible books, and I
It
think
still counts.
it would have to be The Dutch House by Anne
Oh,
Patchett. I'm a big
and
fan of all of her work. This one in particular, the story's great, but it was also read by Tom Hanks, and he was the perfect voice for the narration on it. I highly recommend.
he could read the phone book and I would be enthralled. And I
Yeah.
did love that book too. So you told us what you'd like to do and what you will be doing when you go on vacation next or take a weekend. But what's your favorite escape?
It's actually pretty basic. And it's for this perfect time of year. I go out to my back patio and I sit and I read a book or I read the newspaper, and I'm not inside and I'm hearing the birds and the occasional lawnmower. That's okay. But that's it's a respite for me.
Yeah, just getting away from emails and texts. And
Yeah.
I do love a good book to like escape without leaving.
Yep. Exactly. That's what I love to do.
Well, you have been such a wonderful guest, Kathy. I really appreciate all that you've shared with us. We'll have all that information in our show notes. If you have more questions for Kathy, drop us a line at info@seniorityauthority.org and maybe we'll have her come back. But you have definitely helped our audience.
Well, thank you for being a tremendous host, and I will come back anytime you ask.
Fantastic. That's our show for today. If it helped you think differently, will you help me? Go to the Seniority Authority page on your podcasting app and hit either the plus, heart, favorite, or subscribe button so you don't miss out. And tell your friends so we can reach more minds. Until then, enjoy the chance to get smarter about growing older. That's our show for today. If you liked it, please tell your friends so we can reach more minds and keep the conversation going. Or follow us on social at Seniority Authority. I'm Kathleen Toomey. Until next time, enjoy your chance to get smarter about growing older.